Over to you, Sam.
Brilliant, Dan. Thank you so much. So we are going to be looking at the payroll upload module within Expense Plus today. And as you're going to see, as we go through, the payroll upload module provides a brilliant and easy way to upload your payroll data and to create your payroll payments. One of the key things it does is it removes the need to create complicated payroll journal transactions. You can simply upload your payroll data, specify the funds and categories that you want to record each employee's salary to, and then including any salary splits, and then Expense Plus will do the rest. And we'll look at that, how that works in a second as we go through this morning's session. So for churches and charities that create accounts on an accruals basis, it's worth knowing that Expense Plus automatically accrues salary and payroll payments to the correct period for you. And payroll payments are actually processed through the same brilliant process flow in Expense Plus that I'm sure many of you are familiar with, which is also used for processing invoices and expenses, etc. as well. The final thing, before we just have a quick look at what we're going to cover at the sections of today's presentation, is worth saying that you also get to see your payroll data within Expense Plus if you use the payroll upload module, making it easy to access any figures that you might need and answer any queries, making it easy to plan future budgets. And also when you're filing accounts and trying to find information, you'll be able to get the data you need really easily as well. So Dan is going to share the next slide that we're going to go to, which shows what we're going to cover in today's session. So the first thing we're going to go through is setting up the payroll module. We're then going to move on to talking about uploading payroll data. We're then going to talk about creating payroll transactions from the data that has been uploaded. Then we'll finally look at processing payroll payments, reconciling payroll payments, and then at the end, we will have an FAQ and question session. So if you do have any questions, we'd love to answer them for you. So particularly as we come towards the end of this session, we'll be asking you to put any questions that you have into the chat. So I'm just going to take over screen share. If you just bear with me for a second as I do this, and then we will get going with what we need to go through. Great. So hopefully you can now see my screen. So we are inside Expense Plus. This is an example organization. It's worth saying. So the data that you're seeing today isn't real data, but hopefully it looks very familiar and very much like the data that you will be adding to Expense Plus. So how do we get to the payroll module then? We go to the sidebar menu, which is here. You might have it pinned open if you would like to do that. And we go down to the payroll upload module. Now, when you first come to this module, as you can see on screen, Expense Plus is asking me to do something, and that is because it needs to know when the payroll periods for this example organization are. So the date it wants me to specify is the first payroll period, the start of that payroll period that I want to start using this payroll upload module. So if you've been using Expense Plus for 2 or 3 years, that's absolutely fine. You just need to work out when are you going to switch over to uploading payroll data and processing payments the way that I'm going to show you during this session. Now, for this particular example organization, I'm actually going to go back a month. We're going to import for June. So that I'm going to make that the start of the first payroll period. And once I do this, Expense Plus is then going to go ahead and create all of the payroll periods for the rest of this financial year. So it's basically just letting it know when you're planning to start using this module. And this isn't the payment. This isn't the pay date. This is the start of the payroll period, which for most organizations would be the start of a month. So I'm going to specify that. And Expense Plus has gone ahead and created the payroll periods for the year, and I'll show you that in a second. It's now asking me to specify my different payroll settings, and it's worth saying this module works regardless of how you make salary payments. So let me take you through the different stages in this setting screen. Firstly, the pay date. It's asking you to specify a default pay date, and whenever you pay, that's totally fine because you can get to specify when you want the pay date to be. You can specify, for example, the last day of the current month as the month in question as the pay date. In this case, I'm going to go for the 20th day. If you pay after the end of the payroll period, so maybe you pay on the 10th of the next month, the salaries relating to the prior month, then you can come in here and you can actually say, no, I pay it on the following month. So you get to specify when your pay date is. And obviously, hopefully, you know when that is for your organization. Weekend pay date is trying to be helpful to you. It's trying to say, well, look, surely if the pay date you specified, the default one, falls on a weekend, you're probably going to want to make that payment on a Friday. Otherwise, those salary payments are probably not going to get to the people you want them to get to. And so we recommend you leave this as set as the weekday before. Now, this is just the default pay date and pay date settings. When you come to process a payroll period inside ExpensePlus, you can override this. So for example, at Christmas, maybe you pay salary payments a week earlier than you usually would. That's absolutely fine. This is just the default. So don't worry too much. You just want to set up what your default is here. We're then going to move on to how you make your salary payments. Now, we come into here and we can specify what it is. For lots of organizations, you will make the salary payments, the net salary payments to each of your employees. And therefore, you're going to want to leave this set as individual salary payments to the different people that need to be paid. Now, if you use a payroll provider like Stewardship, then some payroll providers actually, rather than you individually paying the different people you need to pay, actually what they do is they typically direct debit the money out of your bank account as a lump sum, and then they make all the payments for you. If that is the case, then you need to be switching this to lump sum to payroll provider. Now, it's going to ask you how the lump sum is taken, because again, it wants to know for when it creates the salary transactions for you. And so again, typically that's going to be via direct debit, so we can leave that as direct debit. It's then going to ask you whether they add their own fee. So if you use Stewardship to process your payroll payments for you, then they're also going to, in addition to taking all the money they need to take to make all the payments that they need to take for your payroll, they're also going to add their own fee as well. And so if the answer to that question is yes, then you can just come in here and change that to yes. Again, ExpensePlus will ask you when you're processing the payroll what the fee is for that period. And then you get to select the provider in here as well. So Stewardship, for example, you go and select the provider, whoever it is, and if they're not in the list, you can just click add. So this is what happens if you do make payroll payments as a lump sum to the provider, which for most people will not be the case. So let's change this back to individual payments, which will be the case for the majority of the people watching this session. You then have to specify what happens to your HMRC payments. Now, you can pay HMRC either via kind of a payment that you make to them whenever you choose to do that, or you can do it by direct debit where they suck the money out of your bank account on the date that they choose to do that. And so you get to select here what happens. So you need to decide, are you making the payments, in which case leave it as invoice payment, or are they taking the payment automatically, in which case change this to direct debit. Pension payments are really similar. This will default to direct debit because actually nearly all pension providers, as far as I'm aware, do take the pension payments via direct debit. You do have the option to change this if you need to. And this is where you add your pension provider. So I'm going to go on here, and this example organization, I'm going to pretend use as Nest Pension. I'm going to go here and click confirm. So I've added the pension provider as Nest. You can add more than one pension provider. For example, if you've happened to switch the scheme that you use to a different provider back a couple of years ago and you still have some people on another scheme, that's absolutely fine. You can add multiple if that is the case. Typically for most people though, you're just going to add one provider in here. I'm going to click submit. And then the final thing it's asking us to do is it's asking us to set default funds and categories for our different salary kind of payment types. Now, these are just defaults. And so what we're setting here, you get to override it or you get to customize it per employee. So don't get too hung up about the fact that you've got someone that needs to, their salary payment needs to come from a different fund or different category, because this is just a default and you can change this. So we're going to go in here and we're going to select our general fund as our default fund that we're going to pay our salary payments out of. And then we're going to select the category within that fund that we want to pay those salary payments out of. Now, you may have one category called employment costs, in which case you would want to set all of these to that category: employment costs, employment costs, employment costs. Or you may have separate categories for the different elements that you see here. Either way, it's absolutely fine. This example organization has separate categories. So we've got a gross pay category, which we're going to set any gross pay to default to. We've got, and if we type NIC in here, we've got an employer NIC. Have I done that right? Yeah, employer NIC in here, which we're going to code that to. And if we search the word pension, we've got a pension category in here. So you get to map this however you would like for your organization. So I've done that now. Okay, so we have set up our default settings. That's just letting ExpensePlus know what we do for this organization. You'll then be asked to add your employees the first time you come to do this. So inside the manage employees, which is where you'll get taken to do this, you can add your different employees in here. And if your employee is already set up as a payee on ExpensePlus, you can add them really easily. If not, you can still add them just using the add employee button to add your different employees. So if you pay 10 different people, you'd want all of 10 of those set up on this screen. And then finally, let's just go and have a look at the payroll periods. And remember, I said when we first entered that start of the first month of payroll, it's going to create our payroll periods. Well, here they are. Look, the first payroll period, because we told it that it was June, it's created our June payroll period, our July, August, September. It's gone through the rest of the financial year, creating all of these payroll periods for us. If you did this wrongly, you can reset by clicking this reset, and it will allow you to go back and reset when your first payroll period is and what the dates of those were. You can't do the reset if you've already started importing data, so it's worth noting that as well. So I think we've come to the end of the first section, which is setting up our payroll, and hopefully that makes sense. If you do have any questions on the setup of payroll, then do just pop them in the chat, and then Dan will go through them at the end. So we're next going to move on to talking about uploading our payroll data. Now, uploading payroll data to ExpensePlus couldn't be simpler. All you need is the spreadsheet of payroll data, which provides a breakdown of the payroll information per employee. Now, if you use a bit of software like BrightPay or another payroll bit of software that you create you manage your payroll with inside, you will be able to just download this as in spreadsheet format yourself. Now, if you use a payroll provider like Stewardship or a different payroll provider, you can ask them for this spreadsheet. It's a really standard spreadsheet that should be available in all different software packages that are being used to create your payroll. I'm just going to show you what an example payroll file looks like. So the spreadsheet we're talking about uploading is one that looks like this. So it should have your employee names down the side, and then it should have a column for all of the different kind of payroll elements. So we've got the gross pay, the amount that we're paying them per month. We've got the tax that has been deducted from that employee's salary. We've got the employee NIC, so the amount that again has been deducted in NI from that employee. We've got the employer NI, the stuff that we're having to pay on top as the employer. You might have deductions for student loan, postgrad loan, etc. It's got all of these columns in it. So this is the standard spreadsheet that you need to ask your payroll provider for, or find how to download it from the software package that you are using. Let me just switch back the screen share back into ExpensePlus, and let me take you through how you go ahead and upload your payroll data. Okay, so we're going to just go back to the payroll upload overview screen, which is this screen here. And for month one, we're going to go ahead and upload our payroll data. So we click upload data. We get to specify the pay date. Now, remember, this is going to default to whatever you've told it the pay date is. And so again, it's trying to help you. This should be the correct date. And so we can just go ahead and choose the file. So I'm just going to go in here and choose the example payroll file that I've got, and I upload it, and here it appears in here. Now, the first time you come to do this, if you haven't done it before, it may ask you to specify the different columns that relate to each of these different columns in here. Now, you can see that it's picked this up automatically. I've not had to tell it which column the gross pay is, which column the taxes, etc. And that's because it remembers this after you have done it once. If you come to do this the first time, you may find that you get landed in this screen. This screen asks you to specify the data columns in your file. And all you're doing here is you're telling it, look, that's the employee name column, look, that's the gross pay column. And you can come through and you can specify the different columns that are here. Now, you can see here, we haven't specified postgrad loan. Now, I could go ahead and do it. That's the one that I haven't done. I'm not going to do it because what I want to show you what happens if you don't specify one of the columns. This is what it does. Now, if the column is required, so for example, you forget to set the employee name column, you forget to tell ExpensePlus, look, the employee name column's here, it's not going to let you upload. It's going to give you an alert and say, no, I can't upload. But assuming it's one of the optional columns that's missing, maybe you don't even have anyone in this case that needs to pay back a postgrad loan, then it will let you, but it will alert you. Before I do that, the thing I want to mention is the number of header rows would typically be correct. This is how many rows before your data starts. The number of footer rows is really dependent on whether there's a summary totals line at the bottom. Now, there is no summary totals line at the bottom, which is why there are no footer rows. If you end up with a summary total line on your report, that's absolutely fine. Just make sure the number of footer rows is set to 1, and ExpensePlus will skip importing that row for you. So we're going to click submit, and it says, oh, you've missed something here. Do you have any postgrad loans? I'm going to say, well, no, it's fine. Just carry on and click submit. So you sometimes will, or the first time you come to it, will see that screen that we've just been on where it asks you to specify the different columns. But if you've done it more than once, or actually you use a bit of software like BrightPay, it should automatically pick up the columns for you. The next step in the process, which again typically only happens in the first month, is getting you to confirm that your employees are correct. So look, it's already picked up the fact that on the spreadsheet it's found Bob Jones and we've got an employee called Bob Jones. So it automatically maps it. Sarah Smith, it's picked up Sarah Smith. It hasn't picked up this third one, so we're going to have to specify it. And actually, look, the reason is because on the payroll, he's called Stanley Jenkins, and inside ExpensePlus, he's known as Stan Jenkins. And so I'm just having to, again, map these two together. Again, I only need to do this the first time round. Once I've told it once that Stan Jenkins is Stanley Jenkins, it will remember this for future. And so, again, this is me just saying, does the data look right? Yes, it does. So both of these two first steps, you typically won't see after the first time you come to do it because they're not needed, because ExpensePlus just remembers the data for you. Okay, so we're going to click yes, uploaded. Now, yes, please upload. Now, before we upload, it's going to show us this pop-up. Now, this is a great chance to check whether you're happy with it. Do we have 3 employees? Yep. Are we expecting the gross pay to be this? Yes, we are. And so it's a great chance to check that your data is correct. The second thing is that if you have any deductions that you're allowed to add, this is the point to add them. So we have got here a summary of what employee tax and NI we need to pay. You've also got employer tax and NI. Now, I'm sure many of you are aware that typically in any tax year, you can get £5,000 of employer allowance for your church or charity. So actually, although technically we would need to pay £15.28, we don't, because we haven't used up our allowance yet. So actually we get a deduction of that in here. Now, if you're not sure about this, go and check with your payroll provider or go and check inside your payroll software. But this should automatically happen at the start of your tax year if those systems or connections are done properly. Then actually, typically for at least for the first few months in that tax year, you will have a deduction. So that's what we're putting in here. Similarly, if you have anyone that you're able to reclaim SMP for, again, there'll be another deduction from here which you can add in. And so this is reducing the amount down that you need to pay HMRC. Hopefully that does make sense. It's asking you for the employee payment reference. This is the big long number that HMRC asks you to use. And because we're in June, we're in month 3 of the tax year, then actually that is going to be the end code. The beginning part of this code is whatever HMRC has asked you to use for your payments to them. And so we're just going to specify that in there. If you did pay a stewardship or a payroll provider and they add a fee, it would have a fee column, a fee field as well, where you can add in the fee that is going to get added to the amount being taken as well. So we're going to click submit. That has sent the data into ExpensePlus, and that's all we need to do. It's alerting us that Stan Jenkins is called Stanley Jenkins on payroll, so it's just alerting us that there's a slight name difference, but essentially this is it importing all of the data that we wanted, including the deduction here. If we want to make a change to the deduction because we've not done anything here, we can go ahead and change any of the deductions in here. Now, you shouldn't need to change the data that was in that spreadsheet, because that data, if it's come from your payroll software or it's come from your payroll provider, should be 100% right. It's not possible to edit this data. So if you did import it wrongly, maybe you've imported the wrong file, you do need to delete it out and re-import it. So just to note that that is the case. I'm just going to check through my notes here and see if there is anything that I meant to mention that I haven't mentioned. If you just give me a second to do this. No, that's absolutely fine. So let's go ahead and look. Let's go back to the payroll upload screen. Let me just really briefly show you what happens on a typical month, because as mentioned, you don't need to go through and specify those things I've specified. So let's do this whole thing again and just show you what would happen in a typical month. So now we're in July. We're going ahead and picking our payroll file. Obviously, it would be the July one that we'd be picking. We click upload file. Can you see that it's automatically come through to this screen? There's nothing I need to do, and I can just click yes, upload transactions, and I get the same pop-up. So hopefully you can see that after you've done this once, it's very quick and easy just to import each month that you need to import. So that is importing data, and that is what we highly recommend you do. There is an alternative option if you don't have a spreadsheet of your payroll data, and this option we would say to only do if you're really struggling, because keying in data or adding data manually is not ideal. It takes much longer and you're much more likely to make a mistake. Now, if you have added data for your first month, this process for manually adding data rather than importing a file is not too onerous. So we simply can click this option. Rather than upload a file, we can copy a previous month. We'll get to specify the pay date as we usually do, and we get to click confirm. This brings through our payroll data from our last month, and we can go ahead and we can change whatever we need to change about the payroll data before we essentially bring this data into ExpensePlus. So there is a manual upload option, but please avoid doing this where you can, because you're likely to ultimately introduce an error at some point, key in a bit of information wrong, forget to add a deduction, and then you'll find that you either make payroll payment errors, or you'll find that you can't reconcile the transactions later on. So there is an upload option, but just avoid using that where you can. Okay, so our data for our first month is sitting inside ExpensePlus. This is the data. We can click on it. We can go back to this view screen. We can see the data that we imported. We now need to create our payroll transactions inside ExpensePlus. Remember, ExpensePlus is going to create these automatically for us. It's going to remove the need to kind of create journal entries and to try and record things where they need to be, because it's going to do that for us. Now we can either click this create payroll payments inside the month that we are viewing. That's one option. Or if you come back to this kind of overview screen, you can click this little button, the play button, which will allow you to do the same thing. So it's going to ask us to create, it's going to go ahead and create our payroll transactions. The first time you come to do this, it's going to say, well, okay, fine, but where do you want to record the different payroll transactions to? Remember, we've set a default. So by default, it's already saying, well, actually, okay, Bob Jones's gross pay, that needs to go to this category, and Sarah Smith's gross pay, that needs to go to this category. It already remembers that because you've told it the default, but you can override it. And this is the point I was making earlier. So if Sarah Smith actually works for our food bank, then no, we don't want to code her salary payments to the general fund. We want to code them to the food bank fund. So we come in here, we change the fund to food bank. We're going to come in here, I'm going to search for employment costs. There's actually just one category. Remember, I said you don't have to have separate categories for each of these. So this organization only has one category inside their food bank fund. But we've just updated this now and said, actually, no, this person's salary, can we take it out of the food bank fund and out of these categories, not out of the general? And so it allows you to update where you'd like to record salary payments to. Now, for Stan Jenkins, let's pretend that he works part-time for the food bank and part for the main organization. Well, we can split his salary using this plus button here. So we are going to come in here, we're going to add a salary split. We're going to pretend that £100 of his salary is actually, again, he's also going to get coded to the food bank. So we want to leave the rest getting coded to the general fund, but we want to code £100 to the food bank. So we can just come in here, we can enter the different categories we want to code the salary to. We click confirm, and you can see the split. It's automatically said, well, great, £100 to the food bank, therefore this is the remainder that goes to the general fund and to our categories. And so you can split salaries like this. It will remember the splits for you next month. And so again, it gets super quick and easy to do this each month. If you do have any employees that have deductions or additions, it will also make you tell ExpensePlus where you would like, which funding category you'd like those additions or deductions coded to. The classic example of an addition would be maybe you want to do an additional allowance maybe for working at home or something like that, which is in your payroll data, which you want to get reflected and brought into ExpensePlus. Or maybe you've got a deduction for something like the cycle to work scheme. So actually an employee is having £100 removed from their salary because you're deducting it before paying the salaries. And so so you get to specify what the different deductions and additions are in there. It's also worth saying if you use transaction groups, you'll see additional fields that appear here where you can not just code to a funding category, you can also code to a transaction group. If you don't understand what I've just said, then probably you don't use transaction groups, and you're probably best to keep not using transaction groups. So hopefully that makes sense as well. Okay, so we've got our payroll data in here. We want to go ahead and create our payroll transactions. We literally click submit and then click yes. That has gone ahead and created our salary and other payroll payments here for us automatically. It does this based on how you set up ExpensePlus. Had we told it we simply make a lump sum to our payroll provider, it would have created a different set of transactions. So what we've got here is we've got our different net salary payments to our different employees. We've got our invoice payments, pay HMRC, and we've also got a direct debit to Nest Pensions. It goes ahead and it creates those transactions for us. And remember, if you work on an accruals basis, it automatically accrues them to being in the last day of the payroll period in question, assuming that you have auto accruals turned on, which means that even if the Nest pension payment doesn't go for another month and a half, the expenditure will still automatically appear in the month that it relates to. So this is the salary payments screen, and we can get to see all of the different salary payments. If we want to drill into them, we can absolutely do that. At the bottom of this screen, it's showing us a summary of our payroll payments, and it's also just reminding us that actually we had an employer allowance of this, which is why actually the amount that we paid out in salary payments is actually lower by £15.28 than if we went back and looked at the summary screen of what it looks like we should pay. So it's going to just alert you to any deductions or additions that have happened in here as well. Now let's go ahead and look at one of our salary payments. If we want to go and look at this HMRC payment, for example, we can simply click on it. We can go ahead and look at it. It will show us all of the different deductions that have been taken out of each of these employee salaries, and it will show us any amounts that we need to pay as the employer. It's also got the deduction for the NI allowance as well in here. So it automatically creates these transactions for you. It's worth noting you can edit the payroll transactions that have been created, but what you can't do is you can't change the overall amount. So if you decided that Bob Jones, his salary actually after all shouldn't have been coded to our general gross pay, we can go ahead and change it manually if we wanted to in here as well. Okay, that brings us to the end of this section, which is how do we create payroll payments. So we have now done that. We're going to move on now to talk about processing payroll payments. And for this, I'm going to take you to the dashboard screen, which hopefully you're familiar with. And if you're not, we do run a brilliant tool session, which kind of covers not just this payroll, not just the receipts and kind of payments and approvals process in ExpensePlus. It also covers all of the key modules as well. So my assumption as we go through this is you're a little bit familiar with how regular transactions are processed through this process flow. And now I'm going to explain how payroll transactions are processed through this process flow. And so the payroll transactions that we've just been created essentially have been entered for us. They've already done this first stage here of kind of being entered. They got created automatically. Now, most of your payroll transactions do not need any documentation. The one exception to that is your payment to HMRC. So if we go into manage receipts, this is where we're going to find our HMRC payment that just got created, because it wants us to upload the P30 document, which again, if you go into your payroll software or you ask your payroll provider for your P30 document, that's a key document that you have, which kind of has a breakdown of everything, your payment to HMRC. And so it's wanting us to go ahead and upload this, which we can just do really easily. We can click this button, we can choose the file, we can select our P30 document, which looks a bit like this. We can click submit and attach it. We can also just go ahead and check this as well, so that we can see, does this match what we've uploaded? Yes, it does. There's the 150.64 for this month, accept. And so there is a receipt check or document check just for the HMRC element of this. Now, if we go to the approval screen, because remember this is a process flow, we go to the approval screen, then this is where the salary payments that we've created would normally appear. Now, it's worth saying you don't have to, as you process your payroll payments through ExpensePlus, you don't have to turn on approvals. You can turn off approvals for salary payments. So if we come to system settings, sorry, I went a little bit quick there. You click the cog icon and come down to system settings, and you go to the approvals section of here, you can turn on or off. And now we've turned off approvals. We've said approvals are not required for salary payments, which is why we're not seeing any of those 5 salary related payments showing on our approval screen. For your organization, if you do want salary payments to go through the approval screen, then just make sure you've turned this on. And so down here where it says approvals for salary payments, just make sure you turn that on to required. And then instead of skipping the approval screen, which these ones have done, they'll show on the approval screen. And so you need to think what you currently do for salary payments. Do you, for example, outside of ExpensePlus, go and get someone to approve the spreadsheet of kind of payments you're going to make before you then settle the payments? If you do, then chances are you're going to want approvals for salary payments turned on. If you don't, then chances are you're going to want salary payment approvals turned off. So it's up to you as to whether salary payments, as they go through this process, either go onto the approval screen or skip over. Now, our ones have skipped over, so we're going to go to action payments, and this is where we're going to find our salary payments. Here are our 3 net salary payments to our 3 employees. Here is the amount that we need to pay HMRC, and the direct debit to Nest isn't showing here because ExpensePlus cleverly knows the payment's going to go already, and so that's already moved through and skipped out this screen, so we don't need to worry about the direct debit. That's going to get taken automatically. Okay, so now we're going to set up our salary payments. So what we're suggesting, if you use the payroll upload module, is you actually you upload your transactions, you process them through this process flow, and then you make payments just like you do with the other payments that you set up. It's worth noting ExpensePlus will not combine salary payments with other expense payments. So you don't need to worry about Bob Jones having an expense payment on here as well. It's not going to combine the two. It's also not going to send an email to anyone that's being paid a salary. ExpensePlus again knows that you're going to send them pay slips either automatically or manually outside of ExpensePlus, so we don't need to send them a remittance notification for salary payments. So those two things just to bear in mind. So how do we make payments? Well, again, if you're familiar with ExpensePlus, we'd open up our online banking at this point, and we would click on Bob Jones on our online banking. With one click, copy the payment reference and paste it into our online banking. With one click, copy the payment amount, paste it into online banking, and then we'd mark this payment as set up. ExpensePlus is automatically showing the correct due date, i.e. the pay date for these employees, so we can again just make sure we set that up correctly. And what we do is we simply mark them as set up, and so we're just going to do that for these ones. We're going to pretend that we've just set up these three net salary payments. We're going to pretend that we've also set up this HMRC payment here. Now, if your organization has dual authorization turned on, then you're going to be familiar with this, that you're going to have two sections in this screen. So although we've told ExpensePlus we've set up the payments, this is where your second authorizer is then going to go along and authorize the payments. And so they're going to authorize the payments. And of course, they're going to set the pay dates to be on the 20th, which is what it should be. And so we're going to come in here, we're going to set up these salary payments. I'm actually selecting the wrong month, I realized as I was doing this. The actual salary payment date should have been the 20th of June, not July, as I just did for the first two. It's not actually going to matter. ExpensePlus will correct for that later on. And then we've got our HMRC payment here, which we're also going to set up. And again, I'm going to set the 20th of June for that as well. So you can mark salary payments as paid the same way as you would do for regular purchases. Okay, so I think that brings us to the end of how we process our payroll transactions through the regular process flow inside ExpensePlus. Remember, your HMRC invoice payment to HMRC is going to require the P30 document, so that's going to be on the receipts check screen. Your approvals, your salary payments are going to show on the approvals screen if you have approvals turned on for salary payments. They're not if you have them turned off. And then they are going to appear on the payment screen where you set up the payments with that one-click kind of copy feature to set up the payments, and then they're going to move through to the bank reconciliation screen, which is what we're going to move on to talking about now. I'm just going to check my notes again in case there's anything that I forgot to tell you that I should have told you. No, I think that is all fine. Let's talk about bank reconciliation then. So again, I'm assuming that you are familiar with bank reconciliation. Again, if you're not, do join the tour, which we will link to in the when we send out the session recording later today, where you can watch how to do bank reconciliation. But we're just going to look at this for these few payroll transactions. So we're going to come to this screen. We're going to pretend that we've already uploaded our transactions, and now we're coming to reconcile them. And so here are our outgoing salary payments for June. So we've got our Nest pension going out. We've got our three salary payments going out. We've got our HMRC going out as well. Remember that, of course, they're all not typically going to nicely fall on the 20th of June. Your pension payment almost certainly is going to go the month after. Your HMRC payment may have gone on a different date, but that actually doesn't matter. So on here, they're all left on bank account on the 20th. Now, the transactions we've processed are going to be on this right-hand table. So how do you reconcile? Well, really simply, you click the Nest salary, the Nest pension payment, and it's going to go ahead and find the Nest pension payment that was created when we uploaded and created payroll transactions. Here's Stan Jenkins's salary. Again, it's going to automatically match to Stan Jenkins's salary on this side. And then we're going to do the same for these last couple. So we've got another net salary payment again. It's going to match the net salary payment. And then we've got Bob Jones's salary payment. And again, this matches automatically across. And then we've finally got our HMRC payment, which also automatically matches across. So bank reconciliation is how you would expect it to work. If you're familiar with this process flow of bank reconciliation, then what I've just shown you is nothing new. And so hopefully that is really clear. We're now going to move on to the final section then, which is looking at frequently asked questions and any questions that you have. So I'm going to cover a couple of kind of questions that we often get asked, which is around employee tags and also dealing with under or over payments of salaries. But once I've answered these, if you have any questions, then I'll answer those questions as well. So if you would be thinking about any questions you want to ask, and pop them in the chat, in the Zoom chat to Dan. So in your Zoom window, you should be able to find a chat option. If you send those over to Dan, he will then read them out, and we'll go through them in a second. But before we do that, let me just go through these couple of commonly asked questions then. So employee tags was the first one that I'm going to go through. You may have seen this if you had very eagle eyes when we went to the setup of the payroll upload module. So we're inside payroll upload, we're looking inside payroll settings, and if we look inside manage employees, you may have seen this option of apply tag or manage tag. And so essentially you can tag your different employees, which is essentially a way of grouping them. It means that when we look at the reports, we can kind of create a subset report where we can just look at, for example, we might create a tag called key management personnel. And then when we're looking at our payroll upload and we're looking at our payroll data for the year, we can then just pull out the data we want relating to that particular tag. So if you want to set up any tags for employees, that can be done inside manage tags. We've just got a couple here. You can add as many tags as you like, and then you can apply a tag to your different employees just by clicking apply tag. And employees can be part of multiple tags if you want them to be as well. So that's done in here. How is that useful then? Let me just go back to the payroll upload screen. So I'm just clicking back and back to payroll upload. When we look at the month of June in here, we can then filter this rather than looking at all employees. Now, admittedly, we only have 3. We can then filter to say, look, just our admin and ops, or just our key management personnel. And this is helpful, but it's also really helpful because rather than viewing just one particular pay period, you can view all pay periods within the financial year. So it will allow you to get all of the payroll data. For example, if you wanted to look how much have we paid our key management personnel across the whole year, then actually you'll be able to get that using this feature, the employee tags, combined with selecting pay periods as all periods. So hopefully that's helpful. If you've got any more questions about employee tags, please feel free to ask them and I'll cover them in a second. And then finally, the other frequently asked question I wanted to explain is how you deal with under or overpayments. And let me go ahead and explain that. Now I'm just going to go back to bank reconciliations. So if you just give me a second to have a look at this, we're just going to go back to our main bank account. And I'm just going to go to June. I'm going to unmatch one of these transactions just to explain to you how to deal with salary under or over payments. So we're inside the bank reconciliation screen. Now, this is Stan Jenkins's salary again. We all know that it matches to the payment that's gone through our payroll because we saw it do it earlier. I'm going to cover what happens if the two don't match. Now, it's firstly worth saying the reason that they don't match is going to be probably of one of two things. Either instead of uploading your payroll spreadsheet, you've been manually keying in your payroll data. That is a very common reason why they don't match. And you've forgotten, for example, to add, I don't know, a pension deduction for Stan Jenkins, or you added it, but you've miskeyed it as £7.26 instead of £7.62. And so if you are using the manual upload option, one of the disadvantages of that is actually this is where you can end up with payment errors. The second thing that could have gone wrong is when you were physically making payments of your salary payments, instead of using the one-click copy feature we saw inside the payment screen, you've been making the salary payments outside of the ExpensePlus process flow. You've made a keying error, and suddenly, again, the amount inside ExpensePlus doesn't match the amount that you physically paid. So there's a couple of reasons why sometimes there are salary payment errors, and both of these are typically due to kind of manual errors, which you can avoid by using the process flow as we've talked through today. But how do you deal with this then? So in this example, our bank transaction is £7.19.28, and that matches really nicely to what we should have paid Stan Jenkins. But what happens if what we paid to Stan Jenkins was actually £819.28, i.e. we paid him £100 too much? Now, if that happens, what you need to do is you actually need to go ahead and delete this bank transaction for £719.28. I'll just show you briefly how you do that. Hopefully this won't happen, by the way, so what I'm explaining should be very nice to know, but we won't actually need to do it. What I need to do is I need to come back to the bank statement transaction. I need to go ahead and delete the transaction, yeah, so if we've overpaid him, so we paid him 800. In fact, I'm going to go for underpaid him. Am I going underpaid? I'm going to overpaid. So we've overpaid him. So we're going to pretend instead of £718.28, actually we've paid him £818.28. So when we were matching, it wouldn't let us because it was £100 different. What we're going to do is delete that transaction for £819.28. I'm going to replace it with two transactions. And I do that using this upload transactions, and you can manually upload. And what we're essentially going to do is we're going to split this amount into the amount he should have been paid, the 719.28, and the amount that was extra, the extra 100. And then that will allow us to reconcile the amount he should have been paid against what the salary payment says, and the extra amount, the extra 100, as an expenditure. Now, typically, you would then probably ask the employee to pay you back. And when that money comes back, you would record it as a negative expenditure, an expense repayment. And so that's what happens if you end up paying more than the amount you should. If you end up paying less, you essentially typically you do the reverse of that. So actually, if only 619.28 left the bank, you delete that transaction. You add two transactions in its place. You would add the 719.28 out, and then you would also add an in of 100. So net the same amount overall. And again, that will allow you to match the salary transaction, and it will allow you to record the in essentially as an expense repayment, i.e. an underpayment. And then when you go ahead and pay the extra 100, you can then record it, again, reversing that out. I've not explained that particularly well, so apologies, but we will send out in the tour recording a link to the help guide article, which explains what happens if you do happen to under or overpay a salary amount. But the bottom line is you hopefully won't if you use the process flow that we've gone through in today's session.